What happens when a ruthless banker forces two strangers into marriage at gunpoint? When a grieving widower and a disgraced schoolteacher are bound together by desperation, not love. When a 7-year-old girl vows to hate the woman replacing her dead mother. Welcome to Copper Ridge, Montana, 1883, where Grace Ashford is about to learn that sometimes the worst day of your life is actually the beginning of your greatest love story. This is a tale of forced vows and forbidden healing, of a woman who treated the untouchable and a man who thought his heart died with his wife. A story where enemies become lovers, where a marriage born in hatred transforms into destiny, and where three broken souls discover that family isn't about blood, it's about choice. I'm sharing this story from my corner of the world. Drop a comment below telling me where you're listening from, and if you enjoy this journey, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of love against all odds. Now let's begin where all great romances do, with a shotgun, a bitter banker, and two people who have no idea they're about to save each other. Sign it or lose everything. Banker forced widower to marry town spinster. Big mistake. Sign the marriage certificate, Brennan, or watch your ranch burn by morning. Vincent Garrison's smile never reached his eyes cold as the shotgun one of his men pressed against Cole Brennan's spine. At the altar of Copper Ridge's weathered wooden church, Grace Ashford stood frozen in a gray dress, not white, never white, a prisoner in lace about to become a rancher's unwilling bride. The morning of August 15th, 1883, had dawned with an oppressive heat that seemed to press down on the small Montana town like a hand over a mouth, silencing protests before they could form. The air hung thick and still as Cole stood before the altar, his calloused hands clenched into fists at his sides. At 34, he cut an imposing figure, 6 feet 2 inches of lean muscle, earned from years of working his ranch. Sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of winter storm clouds. Those eyes, which once held warmth and laughter, now blazed with barely contained fury as he stared at the wooden cross hanging above the altar. "This is wrong," he muttered under his breath, his jaw clenched so tight his teeth ached. Behind him, Vincent Garrison, the town's banker and self-appointed moral authority, cleared his throat with obvious satisfaction. The corpulent man's fingers were steepled before him like a spider contemplating its web. "Wrong or right doesn't matter much when you're 3 months behind on your loan payments, does it, Brennan? You should be thanking me for arranging this solution." Not many men would be so generous. Generous. The word tasted like ash in Cole's mouth. Garrison had cornered him 2 days ago with an ultimatum that still rang in his ears like a death knell. Marry Grace Ashford, the town's spinster school seerishper, or lose everything his late wife Catherine had helped him build. "Catherine's barely been in the ground 8 months, Cole had protested in Garrison's office, his voice raw with grief and rage. "And that's 8 months too long for a motherless child to be running wild," Garrison had countered, his thin lips curving into what passed for a smile. "Little Emma needs a woman's influence. The whole town's been talking about it. Besides, Miss Ashford's situation is, shall we say, equally desperate. Her position at the school is being reconsidered. 29 and still unwed, it's unseemly for someone teaching our impressionable young ladies." The banker had leaned back in his leather chair, savoring his power. "Marry her, Brennan, and I'll extend your loan by 6 months. Give you time to get the ranch back on its feet. Miss Ashford keeps her respectability. Your daughter gets a mother, and you keep your land. Everyone wins." Everyone wins. Cole wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it. Nobody was winning today, least of all the woman being forced to bind herself to a man who didn't want her. The church door creaked open and Cole's thoughts scattered like startled crows. He didn't turn around, but he could hear the whispers ripple through the small gathering of townspeople who'd come to witness this spectacle. Copper Ridge loved nothing more than a scandal, and this forced marriage had given them enough gossip to last through winter. "She's here," someone whispered, the words carrying in the hushed space. "Poor thing, having to marry beneath her station," another voice murmured. "Better than dying an old maid," came the sharp retort. Cole's jaw clenched tighter. He could hear the rustle of fabric as Grace Ashford made her way down the aisle. Still he didn't turn. He couldn't bear to see the resignation that must surely be written across her face, a mirror of his own trapped despair. Grace Ashford had arrived in Copper Ridge 3 years ago from Boston, a mystery wrapped in proper Eastern manners and elegant speech. She was tall for a woman, nearly 5'8", with rich auburn hair she kept severely pinned and green eyes that seemed to see through people's pretenses. The townspeople had initially been charmed by her education and refinement, but as the months passed without any suitors calling, whispers began. Too proud, they said. Too educated. What man wants a wife who's read more books than he has? Probably scared them all off with that sharp tongue of hers. Cole had defended her once, oddly enough. He'd overheard Mrs. Patterson at the general store saying Grace was putting on airs. Nothing wrong with a woman who speaks her mind, he'd said, thinking of Catherine, who'd never been afraid to tell him when he was being a fool. Now as Grace's footsteps drew closer, he wondered if he'd live to regret those words. The Reverend Mills shifted uncomfortably at the altar. The old man's kind face was creased with concern as he watched the proceedings. This wasn't the first forced marriage he'd performed, but something about this one seemed to trouble him more than usual. "Dearly beloved," he began, his voice lacking its usual warmth, "we are gathered here today to witness the union of Cole Brennan and Grace Ashford, holy matrimony." The words fell into the church like stones into still water, sending ripples of discomfort through everyone present. This was no joyous occasion. It was a business transaction dressed in white lace and hollow vows. Finally, Cole turned to face his bride. Grace stood beside him in a simple gray dress, not white, he noted with grim appreciation. At least she wasn't pretending this was something it wasn't. Her face was pale but composed, her chin lifted with a dignity that made something in his chest tighten unexpectedly. She didn't look at him, keeping her gaze fixed on some point past the pastor's shoulder. Up close, he could see the dark circles under her eyes, the slight tremor in her hands, as she clutched a small bouquet of wildflowers probably picked hastily from the roadside on her way here. She looked exactly like what she was, a woman backed into a corner with nowhere else to run. Just like him. "Miss Ashford," Reverend Mills said gently, his voice heavy with sympathy, "do you come here of your own free will?" Grace's lips parted, and for a moment Cole thought she might actually say no. The church held its collective breath. Then in a voice steady as granite, she said, "I do." The lie hung in the air between them like smoke from a snuffed candle. "And you, Mr. Brennan?" Cole's throat felt like he'd swallowed sand. "I do." Another lie. They were building their marriage on a foundation of falsehoods, and everyone knew it. As Reverend Mills continued with the ceremony, Cole found himself studying Grace from the corner of his eye. She was handsome rather than pretty, with strong features that would age well. Her hands, he noticed, bore small scars and calluses, not the soft, pampered hands he'd expected from a Boston lady. There was a story there, he realized, one he'd never bothered to learn. "The rings?" Reverend Mills prompted. Cole fumbled in his pocket for the simple gold band he'd bought that morning, the cheapest Henderson's general store had to offer. It was nothing like the ring he'd given Catherine, which he'd saved for months to afford. This one was thin, plain, and would probably turn Grace's finger green within a week. Grace had no ring for him. Of course she didn't. She'd probably been informed of this marriage at the same time he had 2 days ago, with no time to prepare, no time to run. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, their hands touched for the first time. Hers were ice cold despite the heat of the day. She flinched at the contact so slightly that only he noticed, but it was enough to make his stomach turn with self-loathing. What kind of man had he become, forcing a woman to marry him? "You may kiss the bride," Reverend Mills said, though he looked as though he'd rather be anywhere else. Cole turned to Grace, meeting her eyes for the first time. They were green, yes, but not the simple green he'd thought. They were the color of sage in morning light, flecked with gold and rimmed with darker forest green. And in them, he saw not fear or sadness, but something that surprised him, defiance. She lifted her chin slightly as if daring him to kiss her, to seal this farce with an intimacy neither of them wanted. He leaned in, meaning to brush his lips against her cheek, the minimum required to satisfy the ceremony. But at the last moment she turned her head, and his lips grazed the corner of her mouth instead. The contact was brief, barely a whisper of touch, but it sent an unexpected jolt through him, like lightning striking dry prairie grass. Grace pulled back immediately, her cheeks flushing pink. "It's done then," she said, her voice low enough that only he could hear. "We're bound. Bound like prisoners, like animals in a trap." The small congregation offered scattered, uncomfortable applause as they turned to face them. Mrs. Patterson was already whispering to Mrs. Henderson, no doubt commenting on Clara's dress or the brevity of the kiss. The men looked anywhere but at Cole, probably thinking of their own wives, their own choices, grateful they weren't standing in his boots. Garrison stood near the back, his satisfaction evident in every line of his corpulent frame. He nodded once at Cole, a reminder of who held the real power here. "Shall we?" Grace said, her voice carefully neutral. She didn't take his arm. Instead, she walked beside him down the aisle with a foot of space between them, might as well have been a canyon. Outside the church, the August sun beat down mercilessly. Cole's wagon waited loaded with supplies from his monthly trip to town. His horse Zeus stamped impatiently, eager to return to the ranch. In the back of the wagon sat a small trunk, all of Grace's worldly possessions, Cole realized with a start. Her entire life reduced to what could fit in a wooden box. "Your things," he started. "That's all of it," she said crisply. The boarding house was quite eager to see me gone. Apparently, having an unwed female teacher as a tenant was becoming problematic for their reputation. The bitterness in her voice was sharp enough to cut. Cole helped her up onto the wagon seat. She accepted his hand, reluctantly dropping it the moment she was settled. As he walked around to the other side, he caught sight of a small figure peering out from behind the general store. Emma, his daughter, 7 years old and all knees and elbows, with Catherine's corn silk blonde hair and his gray eyes. She'd refused to come to the ceremony, had thrown such a tantrum that he'd left her with Mrs. Henderson rather than force her. Now she watched them with eyes full of betrayal and confusion. "Papa," she called out, her voice small and uncertain. "Emma, come here," he said, trying to keep his voice gentle despite the turmoil in his chest. She shook her head violently, blonde braids whipping around her face. "No, she's not my mama. My mama's in heaven and she's coming back. She promised she'd never leave me." Grace stiffened beside him but said nothing. "Emma, please." But his daughter had already turned and run, disappearing behind the buildings. Mrs. Henderson emerged a moment later, shaking her head apologetically. "I'll keep her for another hour or two, Mr. Brennan," the older woman said. "Give you time to settle things at home." Settle things. As if anything about the situation could be settled. The ride to the ranch was silent, except for the creak of wagon wheels and the occasional snort from Zeus. Grace sat ramrod straight beside him, her hands folded in her lap, gripping each other so tightly her knuckles were white. The wedding ring caught the sunlight, looking as out of place on her finger as she looked sitting beside him. The Brennan Ranch sat 15 miles outside of Copper Ridge, nestled in a valley between two ridges that provided shelter from the worst of the winter winds. It wasn't the largest ranch in the county, but it had good water rights and prime grazing land, or it had been prime before last summer's drought killed half his cattle and left him drowning in debt. As they crested the final hill, the ranch spread out before them. The main house was modest but sturdy, built from local timber with a stone foundation. Catherine had insisted on the wraparound porch, saying a home needed a place to watch sunsets and welcome visitors. Now the porch looked empty, forlorn, like it was waiting for someone who would never come home. "It's beautiful," Grace said quietly, surprising him. He glanced at her. "It needs work. Haven't had time for repairs since—" He stopped, unwilling to finish the sentence. "Since your wife died," Grace completed for him, her tone matter-of-fact rather than sympathetic. Mr. Garrison explained the situation quite thoroughly. Your wife's death, your debts, your need for someone to care for your daughter. He made it clear that this arrangement benefits us both. "And does it?" The question came out harsher than he intended. "Benefit you?" Grace turned to look at him fully for the first time since the ceremony. "I suppose that depends on your definition of benefit, Mr. Brennan. I keep my position, avoid the shame of being dismissed for the crime of being unmarried, and gain a roof over my head that doesn't come with daily reminders of my failure to secure a husband through conventional means. Whether that constitutes a benefit or merely a different form of imprisonment remains to be seen." Her honesty was brutal, refreshing, and somehow exactly what he needed to hear. "Then we understand each other," he said. "I believe we do." As they pulled up to the house, Cole saw the curtains twitch in the front window. Mrs. Molly O'Brien, his housekeeper, peered out with undisguised curiosity. He'd sent word ahead about the marriage, no point in shocking the poor woman entirely, but he could imagine the thoughts running through her head. Bridget emerged onto the porch as they stopped. She was a widow herself, weathered and practical, had been working for them since Emma was born. She'd been Catherine's friend, and Cole knew this sudden marriage must feel like a betrayal to her too. "Mr. Brennan," she said, nodding. Then to Grace, "Mistress Brennan." Grace flinched at the title but recovered quickly. "Please call me Grace. I suspect we'll be working closely together, and formality seems unnecessary." Bridget's eyebrows rose slightly. "If you wish, ma'am." The ma'am was pointed a subtle reminder of boundaries. Grace, to her credit, didn't react. Cole helped Grace down from the wagon again, noting how she pulled away from his touch as soon as possible. "Bridget, would you show Grace to her room?" "Her room." Bridget looked confused. "But I prepared the master bedroom." "The spare room," Cole said firmly, "the one at the end of the hall." Understanding dawned in Bridget's eyes, followed by something that might have been pity. "Of course, Mr. Brennan. This way, ma'am." Grace followed Bridget into the house, leaving Cole alone with his thoughts and the bitter taste of his new reality. He unhitched with Zeus, his movements automatic after years of practice, trying not to think about how different this homecoming was from what he'd imagined when he'd married Catherine. They'd barely made it through the front door before he'd swept her into his arms, both of them laughing as he carried her over the threshold. They'd been young in love, full of dreams about the life they'd build together. Now those dreams were buried with her in the cemetery on the hill, and he was left with this hollow substitute. Inside, the house felt different already. Grace's presence, though she'd only been there minutes, seemed to change the very air. He could hear Bridget's voice from upstairs explaining the household routines and Grace's quiet responses, professional, distant, proper. Everything this marriage would be. The spare room Bridget was showing Grace had been meant for the additional children he and Catherine had planned. They'd talked about filling the house with laughter, maybe 3 or 4 little ones running through the halls. Catherine had even started a quilt for the next baby's soft yellow and white squares that now lay forgotten in a trunk in the attic. "Papa," he turned to find Emma standing in the doorway. Her face streaked with tears and dirt. Mrs. Henderson stood behind her, looking apologetic. "She insisted on coming home," Mrs. Henderson explained. "Wouldn't settle." "Thank you for trying," Cole said, his heart breaking at the sight of his daughter's distress. After Mrs. Henderson left, Emma flew into his arms, her small body shaking with sobs. "Why, Papa? Why did you bring her here? This is Mama's house." "Emma, sweetheart." "No," she pulled back, her gray eyes flashing with anger that looked disturbingly adult on her young face. "You promised we'd be okay, just the two of us. You lied." Before he could respond, she'd wrenched away and run up the stairs. He heard her bedroom door slam, the sound echoing through the house like a gunshot. "Children, adjust." Grace's voice came from behind him. He turned to find her standing at the foot of the stairs, having changed from her wedding dress into a simple blue work dress. "It will take time, but they adjust." Speaking from experience, the question came out more sarcastically than he'd intended. As a matter of fact, yes. Her chin lifted in that defiant way he was beginning to recognize. "I've taught dozens of children, Mr. Brennan. I've seen them weather far worse storms than a new stepmother. You're not her mother." The words were cruel, meant to wound, and he saw them hit their mark. Grace's composure cracked for just a moment, a flash of pain crossing her features before she rebuilt her walls. "No," she agreed quietly. "I'm not. And I won't pretend to be. But I am here, and I am now your wife, whether either of us likes it or not. We can make the situation bearable, or we can make it a misery. The choice is yours." She turned and walked into the kitchen, her back straight, leaving him standing alone in the hallway of his own home, feeling like a stranger. Dinner that evening was a disaster. Bridget had prepared a fine meal, roasted chicken with potatoes and green beans from the garden, but it might as well have been sawdust. Emma refused to come down despite Cole's repeated calls. Grace sat at the foot of the table, Catherine's place, though she tried to take a different chair before Bridget had firmly directed her. "It's your place now," Bridget had said, though her tone suggested she didn't entirely approve. They ate in silence, the clink of silverware against plates unnaturally loud. Grace cut her food into precise small pieces, chewing each bite thoroughly. Her manners were impeccable, her posture perfect. Everything about her screamed refinement and education, so different from Catherine's easy, natural grace. "The chicken is excellent, Mrs. Murphy," Grace finally said. "Thank you, ma'am." More silence. "I understand you have a library," Grace ventured, looking at Cole. He nearly choked on his potatoes. "A library?" Mr. Garrison mentioned you had books. I thought perhaps a few shelves in the study. Nothing fancy. He didn't mention that most of them had been Catherine's, that he hadn't been able to bring himself to even enter the study since her death. I see, Grace said when he didn't respond. Would you mind if I do whatever you want? The words came out harsh, dismissive. This is your home now, after all. He saw her flinch slightly, saw Bridget's disapproving look, but he couldn't seem to stop himself. Grace set down her fork carefully. Mr. Brennan, I understand this situation is not what either of us would have chosen, but taking your anger out on me serves no purpose. I didn't force you to marry me any more than you forced me. We are both victims of circumstance, and I would appreciate it if you could remember that. Her words were calm, measured, but there was steel beneath them. Cole felt properly chastised, like a schoolboy caught pulling pigtails. You're right, my apologies. She nodded, picking up her fork again. Perhaps we should establish some ground rules for coexistence, such as, we maintain separate rooms as you've already arranged. We present a united front in public for appearance's sake. In private, we need not pretend affection we don't feel. I will fulfill the duties of running the household and caring for Emma should she allow it. You continue running the ranch. We stay out of each other's way as much as possible. It sounded cold clinical, like a business contract, which Cole supposed was exactly what their marriage was. And Emma, he asked. I won't force myself on her. Children can't be rushed in matters of the heart, but I will be here consistently, patiently until she's ready to accept my presence. That could take a very long time. Then it takes a very long time. Clara met his gaze steadily. I'm not going anywhere, Mr. Brennan. This marriage may be a prison for both of us, but I intend to make the best of it. I've survived worse situations with my dignity intact. I'll survive this too. There was something in her tone, a hint of past pain, that made him wonder what those worst situations had been. But before he could ask, not that he would have, Emma's voice rang out from upstairs. Papa! Papa! I need you. He was up and moving before the second call, taking the stairs two at a time. Emma's door was still closed, but he could hear her crying inside. Emma, sweetheart, what's wrong? I had a bad dream about Mama. His heart clenched. The nightmares had been frequent in the months after Catherine's death, but they'd been getting better. Until today. Can I come in? Only you, not her. He entered to find Emma huddled in her bed, her favorite doll one Catherine had made for her clutched to her chest. Her face was red and blotchy from crying. Tell me about the dream, he said, sitting on the edge of her bed. Mama was trying to come home, but she couldn't find the house because everything was different. Because she was here. The venom in that last word was painful to hear from such a young child. Emma, your mama isn't coming back. We've talked about this. But why did you have to bring someone else? Why couldn't it just be us? How could he explain to a 7-year-old about mortgages and debts? About the crushing weight of trying to hold everything together alone? How could he tell her that some nights he stood in the barn and screamed into the darkness because the grief was eating him alive, that he'd married Grace not just to save the ranch, but because Garrison was right? He was failing Emma, failing to be both mother and father, failing to keep his promise to Catherine to take care of their little girl. Sometimes adults have to make hard choices, he said finally. This was one of them. I hate her, Emma whispered. You don't even know her. I don't want to know her. Cole sighed, pulling Emma into his arms. She came willingly, burying her face in his shirt. I'm not asking you to love her, Emma. I'm just asking you to be polite. Can you do that for me? Emma was quiet for a long moment. Will you make her go away if I'm good? Emma, will you? We'll see, he said, hating himself for the half-truth. He stayed until her breathing evened out, then carefully extracted himself and headed back downstairs. Grace was no longer in the dining room, but he found her in the kitchen helping Bridget with the dishes, despite the older woman's protests. I'm perfectly capable, Mrs. Murphy. I've been taking care of myself for years. It's not proper, Bridget insisted. You're the lady of the house now. I'm a woman who knows how to wash dishes, Grace corrected gently, and I'd rather be useful than ornamental. She looked up as Cole entered, her hands still in the soapy water. Is Emma all right? Nightmare, he said shortly, about her mother. That's natural. Change is frightening for children. She's processing grief and fear of abandonment simultaneously. She's 7, Cole said defensively. She doesn't need to be analyzed. Grace dried her hands on a towel, her movements careful and deliberate. Understanding emotions doesn't diminish them, Mr. Brennan. But if you'd prefer I not offer insights about your daughter, I'll refrain. There it was again, that calm, measured response to his rudeness. It was almost worse than if she'd gotten angry. Anger he could fight against. This quiet dignity left him feeling like a brute. I'm going to check on the horses, he said abruptly. Of course. Good evening, Mr. Brennan. He escaped to the barn where the familiar smells of hay and horse and leather welcomed him. Zeus nickered softly as he approached, and Cole leaned against the stallion's stall, letting the animal's simple presence calm him. This was where he proposed to Catherine, right here in this barn. She'd been helping him with a difficult foaling, her hair coming loose from its pins, her dress stained with blood and birth fluids, and she'd never looked more beautiful to him. When the foal finally stood on shaky legs, he dropped to one knee right there in the straw and asked her to be his wife. She'd laughed and cried at the same time, saying yes before he'd even finished the question. Now he was married to a woman whose last name he'd barely known this morning, whose favorite color he couldn't guess, whose dreams and fears were complete mysteries to him. The barn door creaked open and he tensed, expecting Grace. But it was Bridget carrying a lantern and wearing her shawl against the evening chill. You planning to sleep out here? She asked. Considering it. Bridget hung the lantern on a hook and leaned against the opposite stall. She studied him with eyes that had seen too much life to be fooled by his gruff exterior. She's not what I expected, Bridget said finally. What did you expect? Someone weaker, I suppose. More desperate, but that one's got steel in her spine. Is that supposed to be a compliment? It's an observation. Bridget poked at the hay with her boot. Catherine wouldn't want this for you, you know, this anger, this bitterness. Catherine would understand about saving the ranch. She loved it. She loved the ranch, maybe, but treating that woman like she's the enemy, Catherine would have your hide for that. She was always seeing the best in people, even when they didn't deserve it. She was right, and he knew it. Catherine had never had an unkind word for anyone, always seeing the best in people. She would have welcomed Grace, probably would have had them being friends within an hour. It's too hard, Bridget, he admitted, his voice breaking. Looking at her sitting in Catherine's chair, knowing she'll be sleeping under Catherine's roof, taking care of Catherine's daughter. None of that belongs to Catherine anymore, boy, Bridget said gently. It belongs to the living. And that includes you and that little girl who needs a mother, whether she knows it or not. Emma will never accept her. Emma's 7. 7-year-olds say they'll never eat vegetables either, but somehow they grow up just fine. Bridget pulled her shawl tighter. Give it time. Both of you need to give it time. She left him alone with his thoughts and the soft sounds of horses settling for the night. Eventually, he had to go back inside. The house was quiet, a single lamp burning in the hallway. Grace's door at the end of the hall was closed, no light showing beneath it. He paused outside the master bedroom, his bedroom now his alone. The room still smelled faintly of Catherine's lavender soap, though it had been months since she'd used it. Her clothes still hung in the wardrobe. He hadn't been able to bring himself to pack them away. Her brush still sat on the dresser, a few golden hairs still caught in its bristles. Tomorrow, he thought, he'd have Bridget pack everything away. It wasn't fair to Grace living in a shrine to another woman. It wasn't fair to Emma, who needed to accept that her mother wasn't coming back. And it wasn't fair to him, torturing himself with ghosts. But tonight he lay in the bed he'd shared with his wife, staring at the ceiling, wondering how everything had gone so wrong, so fast. 6 months ago, he'd had everything: a loving wife, a thriving ranch, a happy daughter. Now he had debts, a child who cried herself to sleep, and a stranger living down the hall who wore his ring but would never have his heart. The moonlight streaming through the window illuminated Catherine's sampler on the wall, the one she'd stitched during her pregnancy with Emma. Home is where love lives. The words seemed to mock him now. What happened to a home when love died? What became of it when duty and desperation moved in where love used to be? Somewhere in the house, a floorboard creaked. Grace moving around, perhaps unable to sleep in her new surroundings. He wondered what she was thinking. If she was crying into her pillow or staring dry-eyed at the ceiling like him, did she have someone she'd left behind, a love that circumstances had torn away from her? Or had she always been alone and always on the outside looking in at other people's happiness? He realized with a start that he knew almost nothing about her. 3 years she'd been in Copper Ridge, and all he knew was that she came from Boston, taught school, and read books. Who were her parents? Why had she left Boston? What had driven her west to a small Montana town where she knew no one? The questions nagged at him, but he pushed them away. It didn't matter. They were married now, bound by law and necessity, but that didn't mean he had to know her. They could live as polite strangers sharing a house, but not a life. It would be easier that way, safer. Because if he let himself know her, if he let her become real to him, then he might start to feel something. And feeling anything beyond the grief that had become his constant companion seemed like the ultimate betrayal of Catherine's memory. The clock in the hallway chimed midnight, marking the end of his wedding day. Cole Brennan closed his eyes and tried not to think about how many more empty days stretched ahead of him. Tried not to wonder if Grace was lying awake counting them too. Tried not to imagine what might have been if circumstances had been different for them both. Outside, a coyote howled in the distance, its lonely cry echoing across the valley. It sounded exactly like how he felt, wild, mournful, and utterly alone. The first week passed in a careful dance of avoidance. Grace rose before dawn, preparing breakfast with Bridget's grudging assistance. Cole made sure to be in the barn by the time she entered the kitchen. They took their meals at opposite ends of the long table, Emma's empty chair between them, like an accusation. The child had taken to eating in her room, and neither adult had the energy to fight her on it. Grace spent her mornings attempting to learn the household routines, though Bridget guarded her territory with fierce determination. "I've been doing this for 6 years, ma'am," she'd say whenever Grace offered to help with laundry or cooking. "I know what Mr. Brennan likes." What Mr. Brennan liked Grace was learning was to pretend she didn't exist. He spoke to her only when absolutely necessary, usually in clipped sentences that conveyed information and nothing more. "Storm coming tonight. Fence broke in the north pasture. Emma needs new shoes before school starts." School. That was another source of tension. Grace had assumed she would continue teaching when the term began in 2 weeks, but Garrison had made it clear that married women didn't work outside the home in Copper Ridge. "Your place is with your family to Mrs. Brennan," he'd said with that oily smile when she'd gone to town for supplies. "I'm sure your husband wouldn't want his wife working when there's so much to do at home." She'd wanted to tell him that her husband wouldn't notice if she sprouted wings and flew to the moon, but she'd held her tongue. Years of being the unwanted spinster had taught her the value of silence, of keeping her thoughts locked away where they couldn't be used against her. Now, on the 7th morning of her marriage, Grace stood at the kitchen window watching Cole work with a young horse in the corral. The morning sun caught the sweat on his skin, making him glow like something out of a Renaissance painting. He moved with an easy grace, his voice low and soothing, as he coaxed the nervous animal to accept the saddle. There was a gentleness in him that he showed to every creature on this ranch except her. "He's good with horses," Bridget said, coming to stand beside her. "Has a gift for it. Catherine used to say he could whisper the wildness right out of them." Catherine. Always Catherine. The ghost that haunted every room, every conversation. Grace had found evidence of her predecessor everywhere. A forgotten hairpin under the bureau of recipes written in a flowing hand, tucked into the cookbook, a half-finished letter to a cousin in Texas still sitting in the desk drawer. The whole house was a monument to a dead woman's memory. "She was beautiful, wasn't she?" Grace said, not really asking. She'd seen the photograph on the mantel, the delicate features and laughing eyes captured forever in sepia tones. "Inside and out," Bridget confirmed. Never knew her to say an unkind word about anyone. She had a way of making everyone feel special, like they were the most important person in the world when she talked to them. Everything Grace wasn't. She was too tall, too sharp-tongued, too educated, too Eastern. She'd never had that easy way with people that seemed to come naturally to women like Catherine. She'd always been the one standing at the edge of gatherings, book in hand, watching others dance and laugh and fall in love. "You're not trying to be her, are you?" Bridget asked, and there was something almost kind in her voice. "How could I don't even know who I'm supposed to be here. Not a wife, certainly, not a mother. I'm a placeholder, Mrs. Murphy. A warm body to satisfy the bank and the town gossips." Bridget was quiet for a moment, then said, "You know, when Catherine first came here, she didn't know how to do anything. Couldn't cook, couldn't sew, Couldn't tell a chicken from a rooster? She'd grown up in town. Her father was a shopkeeper. First time she tried to milk a cow, she got kicked so hard she had a bruise for 3 weeks. Grace turned to look at the older woman, surprised. My point is, Bridget continued, everyone has to start somewhere. Even saints were sinners once. Before Grace could respond, Emma burst through the back door, her face streaked with tears and dirt. Papa's horse threw him. He's hurt. Grace's heart stopped. She was running before she consciously decided to move, following Emma's frantic figure toward the corral. She could see a crowd gathering, the ranch hands, who'd been working nearby, all clustered around something on the ground. Cole was sitting up when she reached him, blood streaming from a gash above his left eye. His shirt was torn, and she could see scrapes along his ribs where he had hit the ground. I'm fine, he was saying to Tom, his foreman. Just got careless. You're bleeding, Grace said, dropping to her knees beside him without thinking. She pulled her handkerchief from her pocket, pressing it against the cut. And you might have a concussion. Can you see straight? How many fingers am I holding up? I said I'm fine, he growled, trying to pull away. But she caught his chin with her free hand, forcing him to look at her. How many fingers? Their eyes met, and for a moment the rest of the world fell away. This close, she could see flecks of blue in his gray eyes, could smell the leather and sweat, and something uniquely him. His pupils were equal responsive. No concussion then, she said. 3. 3, he confirmed quietly. Good. Can you stand? He nodded, and Tom helped him to his feet. He swayed slightly, and without thinking, Grace slipped under his arm, taking some of his weight. He stiffened, but didn't pull away. Emma, run ahead and have Mrs. Murphy heat water, Grace instructed. Tom, can you manage the horse? The foreman nodded, already moving toward the agitated animal. Grace half-supported, half-guided Cole toward the house, acutely aware of his body pressed against hers, the heat of him seeping through her dress. I can walk, he muttered. Humor me, she replied. I'd rather not have to explain to the town how I became a widow after only a week of marriage. He made a sound that might have been a laugh, quickly suppressed. In the kitchen, Bridget had already prepared hot water and clean cloths. Grace guided Cole to a chair, then began cleaning the wound with practiced efficiency. You've done this before, he observed, wincing as she dabbed at the cut. My father was a doctor, she said, concentrating on her work. I assisted him from the time I was 12 until... She stopped abruptly. Until I came west. She reached for the iodine. This will sting. It did. He hissed through his teeth but held still. Emma watched from the doorway, her face pale with worry. Is Papa going to die? No, sweetheart, Grace said gently. He's going to be just fine. Head wounds always bleed a lot, but this one isn't deep. He won't even need stitches. Emma crept closer, drawn by the calm authority in Grace's voice. You know about medicine? A little. My father taught me. Grace applied a bandage to Cole's forehead. Could you teach me? It was the first time Emma had spoken to her directly without anger or hostility. Grace was careful not to show how much it meant. If you'd like, she said casually, though I should warn you it involves learning about blood and bones and other things that might seem scary. I'm not scared, Emma said quickly, lifting her chin in a gesture that was pure Cole. I helped when our foal was born last spring. There was lots of blood then. Brave girl, Grace murmured, finishing the bandage. There, all done. You'll have a headache and you should rest today. I have work to do, which Tom and the other hands can manage for one day, she interrupted. Or would you prefer to pass out in the field and really give Emma something to worry about? Their eyes met again, a silent battle of wills. Emma watched them both, her gaze darting between them like she was watching a tennis match. Finally, Cole relented. Fine, half a day. The whole day. Until after lunch. Until tomorrow morning. You're awfully bossy for someone who's been here a week. And you're awfully stubborn for someone who just got thrown from a horse. Emma giggled. Actually giggled. Both adults turned to stare at her. She immediately covered her mouth, looking guilty for finding anything amusing in Grace's presence. Why don't you sit with your father for a while, Grace suggested. Make sure he doesn't try to sneak out to the barn when I'm not looking. Emma nodded solemnly, taking her duty seriously. She pulled a chair close to Cole's, her small hand reaching out to touch his arm, as if reassuring herself he was really okay. Grace busied herself at the stove, giving them space but listening to their quiet conversation. Emma was telling him about a bird's nest she'd found, her voice animated in a way Grace hadn't heard before. Cole responded with genuine interest, asking questions, making suggestions about what kind of bird it might be. This was who they were without the weight of grief and resentment, a father and daughter who adored each other, who found joy in simple discoveries. Grace felt like an intruder witnessing something private and precious. "Miss Grace." Emma's voice startled her. She turned. "Yes. Could you teach me now about medicine?" Grace glanced at Cole, who shrugged slightly. Not exactly permission, but not refusal either. "We could start with something simple," Grace said carefully. "Would you like to learn how to make a healing salve? It's good for cuts and scrapes." Emma nodded eagerly, and for the next hour, Grace taught her how to mix herbs and beeswax, how to test the consistency, how to store it properly. The child was a quick learner, asking intelligent questions, showing a focus that reminded Grace of herself at that age, hungry for knowledge in any form. "My mama used to make something that smelled like roses," Emma said suddenly, her hands stilling in their work. "For her hands." "Rose hip oil probably," Grace said gently. "Would you like to learn to make that too?" Emma bit her lip, clearly torn between loyalty to her mother's memory and curiosity. Finally, curiosity won. "Maybe, if it's not the same, if it's different from Mama's." "Everything we make will be different," Grace assured him. "This is our recipe, yours and mine, not anyone else's." Emma seemed satisfied with that, returning to her work with renewed concentration. Cole watched them from his chair, his expression unreadable. Grace couldn't tell if he was angry about Emma warming to her or relieved that his daughter was showing interest in something besides grief. The peace was shattered by the sound of horses approaching fast. Tom burst through the door, his face grim. "Boss, we got trouble. Garrison's here with some men, saying something about inspecting the property." Cole was on his feet, immediately swaying only slightly. "What kind of inspection?" "The kind where they're looking for reasons to call in your loan early," Tom said bluntly. He's got that smile on his face, the one that means someone's about to lose everything. Grace felt her stomach drop. She'd seen that smile, knew exactly what it meant. Garrison was a predator who fed on others' misfortunes, and he'd clearly decided that forcing this marriage wasn't enough. "I'll talk to him," Cole said, heading for the door. "Wait," Grace said. "Let me come with you. This isn't your problem. I'm your wife. Legally, that makes it very much my problem." She untied her apron, smoothing her hair. Besides, Garrison might be less aggressive with a lady present. Cole looked like he wanted to argue, but Tom nodded. "She's got a point, boss. Garrison likes to keep up appearances." They walked out together, not touching, but presenting a united front. Garrison sat on his horse like a king, surveying his domain, flanked by two men Grace recognized as his enforcers, men who'd thrown more than one family off their land. "Cole," Garrison said, tipping his hat mockingly. "Mrs. Brennan, how lovely you look. Marriage clearly agrees with you." "Mr. Garrison," Grace said coolly, "to what do we owe the pleasure?" "Oh, just a routine inspection. Need to make sure my investment is being properly maintained." His piggy eyes swept over the property, cataloging every loose board, every patch of peeling paint. "I see the barn needs repairs. And that fence line is looking shabby." "Nothing that affects the value of the property," Cole said tightly. "Oh, but it does," Garrison smiled. "You see, I've had an offer on this land, a very generous offer from someone who could put it to better use. The ranch isn't for sale. Everything's for sale at the right price. And when you default on your loan, which, let's be honest, we both know you will, I'll be happy to facilitate the transfer." Grace stepped forward. "May I see the loan documents, Mr. Garrison?" He blinked, clearly not expecting that. "I beg your pardon. The loan documents, the original agreement my husband signed. I'd like to review them." "Whatever for? It's hardly a woman's concern." "On the contrary, as Cole's wife, his debts are now mine. I have every right to understand our financial obligations." She held out her hand expectantly. Garrison's face reddened. "I don't carry such documents with me." "How convenient. Then I suppose this inspection will have to wait until you can produce them." After all, we wouldn't want any misunderstandings about the terms of the agreement. The terms are simple, he sputtered. He owes me money. If he can't pay, he loses the ranch. The specific terms, Mr. Garrison, payment schedules, interest rates, penalties, or all the details that I'm sure a businessman of your reputation would have carefully documented. Garrison's eyes narrowed. You're quite the little lawyer, aren't you? I'm a woman who reads contracts before signing them, a habit I learned from my father. Your father, the doctor. My father, the doctor, who also happened to have a law degree from Harvard. It was true, though her father had never practiced law, preferring medicine. But Garrison didn't need to know that detail. The banker's face went from red to purple. You can't. I can and I will request a full accounting of this loan, Mr. Garrison. And if I find any irregularities, any hint of usury or fraudulent terms, I will take it to the territorial judge. Judge Hammond, I believe he struck me as a man of integrity when I met him at church last Sunday. It was a bluff mostly. She had met the judge briefly, but she had no idea if he would take their side against Garrison. But the banker didn't know that. Garrison yanked his horse's reins hard enough to make the animal dance nervously. You've got 6 months, Brennan, 6 months to pay in full, or this ranch is mine. He glared at Grace. And you might want to teach your wife her proper place before she finds herself in trouble she can't talk her way out of. He rode off with his men, leaving a cloud of dust in their wake. Cole turned to Grace, his expression unreadable. Harvard, he said finally. I didn't lie. My father did have a degree from Harvard. And you just happened to forget to mention that you never asked. She met his gaze steadily. You've made it clear you don't want to know anything about me. Remember? He was quiet for a moment, then said, that was impressive, what you did there. It was a delay tactic, nothing more. He'll be back and he'll be angrier. Still, you didn't have to do that. This isn't your fight. Yes, it is. She gestured to the ranch around them. This is my home now, whether either of us likes it or not. If Garrison takes this ranch, I lose too. Emma loses. We all lose. So it's about self-preservation. Partly, she added, and partly because men like Garrison have been making women like me dance to their tune my whole life. I'm tired of it. Something shifted in Cole's expression, a recognition of shared experience. They'd both been forced into this marriage by Garrison's manipulations. Both been stripped of their choices. We need to look at those documents, Grace said. The real ones. There might be something we can use. They're in the study, Cole said slowly. I haven't been in there since Catherine died. It was her favorite room. Would you like me to get them? He shook his head. No, it's time. I need to stop avoiding it. They walked back to the house together, and Grace was surprised when Emma slipped her hand into hers as they entered. The gesture was tentative, ready to be withdrawn at the first sign of rejection. Grace kept her grip gentle, neither holding too tight nor letting go. The study door had been closed for so long, the hinges creaked in protest. The room beyond was frozen in time dust motes, dancing in the afternoon sunlight, streaming through lace curtains. Books lined 2 walls, their spines showing an eclectic mix of interests: poetry, agriculture, history, novels. A delicate writing desk sat near the window, papers still scattered across its surface, as if Catherine had just stepped out for a moment. Cole stood in the doorway like he was facing a firing squad. Grace could see the pain etched in every line of his body. She loved this room, he said quietly. Spent hours here reading writing letters. She was teaching herself Latin from those books over there. Said she wanted Emma to have a proper education, not just the basics they teach at the town school. She sounds like she was remarkable, Grace said honestly. She was. He moved into the room, slowly running his fingers along the desk surface. She would have liked you, I think. You're both fighters in your own ways. It was the kindest thing he'd said to her since their wedding. Grace didn't know how to respond, so she stayed silent. Cole opened a drawer in the desk, pulling out a leather portfolio. The loan documents are in here. Catherine kept all the important papers organized. She had a better head for numbers than I did. They spread the papers on the desk. Grace pulled up a chair while Cole stood behind her close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. Emma had wandered over to the bookshelves, running her small fingers along the spines with reverent care. Here, Grace said, pointing to a clause in the contract. This interest rate, it's higher than what he told you originally, isn't it? Yes. Cole leaned closer, his breath stirring her hair. It was supposed to be 8%, but this says 12. And hear this penalty clause. It says if you miss even one payment, he can call in the entire loan immediately. That's not standard. I didn't read it carefully, Cole admitted. Catherine was sick dying, and I just needed money. For the doctor, for medicine. I would have signed anything. Grace heard the guilt in his voice, the self-recrimination. He took advantage of your desperation, she said firmly. That's what men like Garrison do. She continued reading, her finger tracking along to the lines of text. There was something here, something not quite right about the language of the terms. Her father had taught her to read contracts, had shown her how unscrupulous men hid their tricks in legal language. Wait, she said suddenly. This date, when did you sign this? March 15th. But this is dated March 20th. And look, the interest calculation starts from March 1st, not the date of signing. Cole leaned even closer, studying the document. Their faces were inches apart now, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his gray eyes, could count his eyelashes. He's been charging me interest for weeks before I even got the money, Cole said. What, just that? If the date is wrong, the whole contract might be void, or at least questionable enough to take to a judge. She turned to look at him, not realizing how close he was. Their faces were inches apart, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his gray eyes, could count his eyelashes. For a moment, neither moved. The air between them seemed to crackle with sudden awareness. Grace's heart thundered in her chest, and she saw Cole's eyes drop to her lips for just an instant before he pulled back, clearing his throat. We should take this to a lawyer, he said, his voice rougher than usual. Do you know one you trust? There's a man in Denver, Samuel Fletcher. He helped my neighbor with a land dispute last year. Denver is a day's ride each way. I'll leave tomorrow. We'll leave tomorrow, Grace corrected. This affects both of us. Besides, I might be able to help explain the contract issues we found. He looked like he wanted to argue, but then nodded. What about Emma? I can stay with Bridget, Emma piped up from where she'd been listening. I'll be good, I promise. When it was the first time she'd volunteered to make things easier for Grace. Another small victory. That evening dinner was different. They still sat at opposite ends of the table, but Emma joined them, chattering about what she'd learned making the salve. Cole actually responded to Grace's questions about the ranch, explaining their water rights, the grazing rotation, the plans he had had for expansion before everything fell apart. You could still do it, Grace said. If we can get Garrison off our backs, those plans could work. Cole raised an eyebrow. Like it or not, we're partners now. Your success is mine, your failure is mine. That's a heavy burden to put on you. I've carried heavier, she said quietly. After Emma went to bed, asking for only one request from Cole, instead of 3 progress, Grace found herself alone with Cole on the porch. The evening was cool, stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. She'd brought out coffee, and they sat in the 2 rocking chairs, not talking, but not exactly uncomfortable either. Why did you really come west? Cole asked suddenly. Grace was quiet for a long moment, debating how much to reveal. My father died, she finally said. Suddenly, a heart attack. We discovered afterward that he'd been hiding debts, gambling debts. Everything had to be sold, the house, his practice, everything. I'm sorry, but that's not why I ran. She took a sip of coffee. The debts were manageable. It was what people found when we sold his office, records of all his patients, including prostitutes, opium addicts, women with syphilis, men with preferences they couldn't admit publicly. Cole said nothing, just listened. My father never judged, he just healed. But Boston society, she gave a bitter laugh. They crucified me along with him, said I must have known, must have been complicit. Some said I had been my father's assistant in more than medical matters. Bastards, Cole muttered. Grace was surprised by his vehemence. I had enough money for a ticket west, as far from Boston as I could afford to reach. Thought I could disappear here, be anonymous. Instead, I became the town's spinster, subject of more gossip than I'd ever been back home. I'm sorry, he said again, and she could tell he meant it. Don't be. I made my choices just like you made yours. They lapsed into silence again, but it was more comfortable now, less weighted with resentment. Grace found herself stealing glances at him in the dim light. He was handsome in a rough-hewn way, with strong features and capable hands. Under different circumstances, she might have no. She couldn't think like that. This was a business arrangement, nothing more. The fact that her heart had raced when he'd been close to her in the study meant nothing. She was simply lonely, responding to the first bit of kindness he'd shown her. "Thank you," Cole said suddenly. "For what? For what you did with Garrison today. For helping Emma. For not giving up, even though I've been," he trailed off. "Difficult, stubborn, occasionally insufferable." A smile ghosted across his lips. "I was going to say unwelcoming. That too. I know this isn't what you wanted, Grace. This life, this marriage, but I want you to know I'll try to make it bearable. I can't offer you love or affection, but I can offer you respect. Partnership." It was more than she'd expected, though less than that treacherous part of her heart wanted. "Partnership," she agreed. "That's enough." But as she lay in her narrow bed that night, listening to the old house settle around her, she wondered if it would be enough. She could already feel the walls around her heart beginning to crack, letting in dangerous feelings for a man who would never love her. She thought of the way he'd looked at her in the study that moment of connection, and ruthlessly pushed the memory away. This was a business arrangement. She needed to remember that. Her heart had no place in this marriage, no matter how much it might want to claim otherwise. She'd survived heartbreak before, though that seemed pale and childish now, compared to the complex pain of living with someone who tolerated her presence for necessity's sake. Down the hall, she heard Cole's footsteps pacing his room. Was he thinking of Catherine, missing her warmth beside him? Or was he perhaps thinking of that moment in the study too, that unexpected spark of something? Grace turned over, burying her face in the pillow. Tomorrow they would go to Denver, try to save the ranch. Tomorrow they would continue this dance of polite partnership. Tomorrow she would be stronger, would rebuild the walls around her heart. But tonight, in the darkness of her small room, she allowed herself to imagine what it might be like if things were different. If she'd met Cole before Catherine. If they'd chosen each other instead of being forced together. If Emma could learn to love her not as a replacement, but as herself. If the word wife could mean something more than a legal designation. Dangerous thoughts, foolish thoughts. But in the darkness, with no one to see or judge, she held them close like precious secrets, these dreams of what could never be. Outside, a hawk cried in the night, Catherine's favorite bird, Cole had said. A symbol of freedom. Grace closed her eyes and wished for freedom too. Freedom from this ache in her chest. Freedom from wanting things she couldn't have. But instead of freedom, all she felt was the weight of the ring on her finger, a thin band of gold that bound her to a man whose heart belonged to a ghost. And somewhere between waking and sleeping, Grace Ashford Brennan whispered a prayer to whoever might be listening, not for love, which seemed too much to ask, but simply for peace, for a way to survive this marriage with her dignity and her heart intact. Though she suspected it might already be too late for both. The journey to Denver began before dawn, the sky still clinging to night's last stars. Grace had packed carefully her dark blue wool traveling dress that wouldn't show the dust of the road, her hair braided tightly and pinned in a coronet that would withstand the wind. When she emerged from her room, she found Cole already waiting by the wagon, checking the horses' harnesses one final time. "You could have woken me earlier to help," she said, climbing up onto the seat without waiting for his assistance. "Didn't want to disturb you." He swung up beside her, taking the reins. "It's a long journey." "I've traveled longer. From Boston to here took 2 weeks by train and stage. I imagine not by farm wagon over rough roads. Are you trying to convince me to stay behind Mr. Brennan? Would it work if I were, oh, not in the slightest." He made that sound again, the one that might have been a laugh if he'd let it fully form. Grace was beginning to recognize it as his way of acknowledging points scored against him. They rode in companionable silence as the sun rose, painting the mountains in shades of rose and gold. Grace found herself mesmerized by the landscape so different from the crowded streets and gray harbors of Boston. Here the world seemed endless, full of possibilities and second chances. "It's beautiful," she murmured, not really meaning to speak aloud. "Different from back east. Like another world entirely. In Boston you can't see the horizon, buildings and people everywhere pressing in. Here," she gestured at the vast expanse of prairie and mountain, "here you can breathe." Catherine said something similar when she first came out. His voice was thoughtful rather than pained. Said the space made her feel small but free at the same time. That's exactly it. Grace glanced at him, grateful he was sharing. Where was she from originally? St. Louis. Her father ran a dry goods store there, but he had dreams of cattle ranching. Brought the whole family out when Catherine was 16. She used to joke that he dragged them to the edge of the world, but she loved it eventually. Took some adjusting. The first winter nearly broke her. She'd never seen snow like we get here. But by spring, she said she couldn't imagine living anywhere else. It was the most he'd spoken about Catherine without that edge of grief making his voice sharp. Grace treasured the small confidence, filing it away with the other pieces of information she'd been gathering about this complex man beside her. Around midday, they stopped to rest the horses and eat the lunch Bridget had packed. Grace spread a blanket under a stand of cottonwoods near a small creek, the sound of water a pleasant accompaniment to their meal. Cole seemed more relaxed away from the ranch, as if the distance from memories allowed him to breathe easier. Tell me about this lawyer, Grace said, cutting slices from a loaf of bread. Can we trust him? Sam Fletcher's honest as they come. We served together briefly during the war. He accepted the bread and cheese she offered. You were in the war, I didn't know. 3 years, cavalry. He was quiet for a moment. Longest 3 years of my life. Sam saved my life at Chancellorsville, figure that makes him trustworthy enough. How did he save your life? Cole stared out at the creek. Took a bullet in the shoulder, fell from my horse in the middle of a charge. Sam rode back for me, pulled me up onto his mount while under fire. Foolish thing to do, could have gotten us both killed. But that was Sam always doing the right thing, even when it was the stupid thing. Sounds like someone else I know, Grace said quietly. Cole looked at her puzzled. Marrying a stranger to save his ranch and protect his daughter isn't exactly the easy choice. That's different. That's necessity. Is it? You could have taken Emma and started over somewhere else. Plenty of men would hire him. Cole considered this, chewing thoughtfully. This land is all Emma has left of her mother. I couldn't take that from her, too. They riding back under fire. Same thing. They continued in silence, but it was comfortable now. As they packed up to leave, Cole asked, why did you really come west? The question hung between them. Grace debated how much to reveal, then decided he had earned some truth. My father died, suddenly, heart attack. She folded the blanket with careful precision. We discovered afterward he'd been hiding debts. Gambling debts. Everything had to be sold, the house, his practice, everything. I'm sorry, but that's not why I ran. She placed the blanket in the wagon. The debts were manageable. It was what people found when we sold his office. Records of all his patients, including prostitutes, opium addicts, women with syphilis, men with preferences they couldn't admit publicly. Cole said nothing, just waited. My father never judged. He just healed. But Boston society, her laugh was bitter. They crucified me along with him. Said I must have known, must have been complicit. Some said. She stopped, unable to voice the worst of it. What did they say? His voice had gone hard. That I had been my father's assistant in more than medical matters. That I was indecent with male patients. That I was... The word stuck in her throat. Bastards. His vehemence surprised her. I had enough money for a ticket west, as far from Boston as I could afford to reach. Thought I could disappear here, be anonymous. Instead, you became the town spinster. Subject of more gossip than I'd ever been back home. She climbed back onto the wagon. Ironic, isn't it? As they approached Denver in the late afternoon, the city sprawled before them, a place of ambition, built on gold rush dreams and railway promises. The streets teemed with people, miners and merchants, painted ladies and proper wives, children darting between wagons, dogs barking at everything. It's so loud, Grace said, and he heard the slight distress in her voice. After the ranch, it's overwhelming, he agreed. Sam's office is just 2 streets over. We can settle in the hotel first if you'd prefer. No, let's see him while we can. I want to know where we stand. The law office of Fletcher and Associates occupied the 2nd floor of a solid brick building. Sam himself answered their knock, his face breaking into a genuine smile when he saw Cole. Brennan, good to see you, man. Then noticing Grace, his expression shifted to one of polished interest. And this must be the new Mrs. Brennan. I heard you'd remarried. News travels even to Denver, apparently. Sam was everything Cole wasn't: polished, educated, comfortable in his city clothes and manners. He took Grace's hand with practiced gallantry, and Cole felt an unexpected stab of something that couldn't possibly be jealousy. "A pleasure, Mrs. Brennan. Please come in. What brings you to Denver?" They settled in Sam's office. Grace produced the loan documents from her satchel, explaining their findings with clear precision, pointing out the discrepancies in dates, the questionable interest rates, the unusual penalty clauses. Sam listened intently, occasionally asking for clarification, his expression growing more serious as she spoke. Cole watched Grace in her element, intelligent, articulate, commanding respect. Sam was clearly impressed, and that irritating feeling in Cole's chest intensified. "This is definitely irregular," Sam said finally. "Garrison's been playing these games for years, but this might be the first time he's been careless enough to leave evidence. The date discrepancy alone could be grounds for challenging the entire agreement." "So we have a case?" Cole asked. "You have the beginning of one. I'll need to do some research, check territorial law regarding usurious lending practices. But Grace is right, this contract has serious problems." Grace leaned forward. "How long before we'd have an answer?" "Give me tonight to review everything thoroughly. Can you stay until tomorrow afternoon?" Cole glanced at Grace, who nodded. "We'll be at the Imperial Hotel." Sam stood, shaking their hands. "This is good work, Grace." His use of her first name made Cole's jaw tighten. "Have you studied law?" "Only what my father taught me. He believed women should understand contracts and legal matters even if we can't practice law ourselves." Sam's smile was warm, appreciative. "A forward-thinking man. We could use more like him." Outside, Grace seemed energized by the meeting. "He seems competent." "And he clearly respects you," Cole said, hearing the edge in his own voice. Grace looked at him sharply. "Was that jealousy? Sam's a good man?" Cole added quickly. "One of the few I trust completely." "You don't trust easily, do you? Not anymore." She understood war, Catherine's death, Garrison's betrayal. They walked toward the Imperial Hotel in silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. "Thank you," Grace said suddenly. "For what?" "For bringing me, for trusting me with this." Cole stopped walking, looked at her directly. "You earned that trust. What you did with Garrison, what you found in those documents." He trailed off, but the meaning was clear. Grace felt warmth bloom in her chest, dangerous warmth. The Imperial Hotel was modest but clean. Cole approached the desk. "2 rooms, please." The clerk's face fell. "I'm sorry, sir, only one available. Cattlemen's convention in town were nearly full. You're lucky we have even this one room." Cole and Grace looked at each other. A silent conversation passed between them. "We'll find another hotel," Cole said. "I'm afraid you'll find the same situation everywhere, sir. The whole city's booked." Grace's hands tightened on her reticule, but her voice was steady. "We'll take it." "Are you certain?" Cole asked quietly. "We can be adults about this, surely." The room was small but pleasant, a single bed, not particularly large, a washstand, and a chair by the window. They stood awkwardly in the doorway, neither wanting to be the first to enter. "I'll sleep in the chair," Cole said. "Don't be ridiculous. You're too tall. You'll be in agony by morning." "I'll take the chair." Or, Grace said, her cheeks pink but her chin up. "We could be adults about this. The bed is large enough. We can share it without anything improper happening." The thought of lying beside her, even fully clothed, even with careful distance between them, made Cole's pulse race in a way it hadn't since Catherine, which was exactly why he shouldn't agree to it. "All right," he heard himself say. They prepared for bed with careful efficiency. Grace disappeared down the hall to the women's washroom with her bag. Cole changed in the room, clean shirt, trousers, not a nightshirt that seemed too intimate. When Grace returned, she wore a high-neck nightgown covered by a wool wrapper, her hair loose in a braid down her back. She looked younger, softer, and Cole had to turn away. They lay down with careful precision, each claiming their edge of the mattress, a good foot of space between them. The silence was deafening, except for the sounds from the street below and their carefully regulated breathing. "Cole." Grace's voice was barely a whisper in the darkness. "Yes. What if this doesn't work? The legal challenge, I mean." Cole stared at the ceiling, considering. "Then we start over. Find somewhere else. Build something new." We're married, aren't we, for better or worse?" Grace was quiet for so long he thought she'd fallen asleep. Then so softly he almost missed it, "I never expected you to honor that part. I may not be a good husband, Grace, but I keep my vows. All of them." The mattress shifted as she turned to look at him, though he kept his eyes fixed upward. "You're not as bad a husband as you think. I've barely been a husband at all. You've been grieving. That's understandable. For how long? How long before it becomes an excuse rather than a reason? There's no timeline for grief, Cole. It takes what it takes. Catherine would have wanted me to move on, to be happy, but you're not ready." "No," he paused, "but I'm trying. You deserve that much me trying." Now she was definitely looking at him. Unable to resist, he turned his head to meet her eyes. In the moonlight filtering through the window, her face was all planes and shadows, beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with conventional prettiness and everything to do with strength, intelligence, and unexpected kindness. "What did you expect?" he asked quietly. "When you stood at that altar? Tolerance, resentment maybe, eventual indifference if I was lucky. And instead I got a man who's honorable even in his pain, who loves his daughter more than his own happiness, who's trying to be fair even when life has been anything but fair to him." The words hung between them, too honest, too revealing. Cole felt something crack inside his chest, some wall he'd built around his heart beginning to crumble. "Grace, A crash from the room next door shattered the moment, drunken laughter, singing, furniture scraping. The spell broke. They both turned away, returning to their careful positions on opposite sides of the bed. But something had changed in that moment of connection. The space between them no longer felt like a gulf, but like a bridge waiting to be crossed. When Grace's breathing eventually deepened into sleep, Cole found himself listening to the sound, finding an unexpected comfort in her presence. He thought of Catherine, wondering what she would make of this situation. She'd always been the romantic one, believing in fate and destiny and love conquering all. She would probably laugh at the irony of him lying beside a woman he was beginning to respect, maybe even like, while holding himself apart out of loyalty to her memory. "Stop punishing yourself and that poor woman for being alive," he could almost hear her say. When he finally slept, he dreamed not of Catherine, but of green eyes flecked with gold and a voice saying "we," like it was a promise. Morning came too soon and not soon enough. They dressed with awkward efficiency, both hyper-aware of the intimacy they'd shared, neither mentioning it. Breakfast in the hotel dining room was a silent affair. Not uncomfortable exactly, but both processing something neither was ready to name. When they returned to Sam's office, he was grinning. "Garrison's in serious trouble if this goes before a judge," he announced, spreading out additional documents he'd researched overnight. "The territorial laws are clear about usury. The interest rate he's charging exceeds legal limits. Combined with the date discrepancies and unclear terms, you have grounds not just to challenge the loan, but potentially to have it declared void." Grace leaned forward eagerly. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means Garrison might have to return any payments already made and cancel the debt entirely. At minimum, a judge would likely order a restructuring of the loan at legal interest rates, which would reduce your payments significantly." "He won't let this go to court," Cole said grimly. "Garrison's got too much to lose if word gets out about his practices." "Exactly," Sam smiled, "which means he'll negotiate. I can draw up a letter outlining our findings and our intention to file suit. My guess is he'll offer to restructure rather than risk exposure." "Do it," Grace said before Cole could respond. "We need to act quickly before he finds another way to corner us." Sam nodded approvingly. "I'll have it ready within the hour. You can take it back with you, deliver it personally." Sometimes the shock value of immediate action works in our favor. While Sam prepared the documents, Cole and Grace walked through Denver's streets, stopping at shops for supplies they couldn't get in Copper Ridge. Grace paused at a bookshop window, her eyes lighting up at the display. "Go ahead," Cole said, opening the door. "Look around. We shouldn't spend unnecessarily." "Books aren't unnecessary. Catherine always said that." He gestured inside. "Besides, Emma's been asking about new stories." They spent an hour in the shop, Grace carefully selecting books for Emma fairy tales and beginning readers, while Cole watched her animated discussions with the proprietor about different editions and authors. She was in her element here, surrounded by knowledge and stories, and he found himself charmed by her enthusiasm. As they left with their wrapped purchases, Cole observed, "You miss it. Teaching." Every day, she clutched the books like treasures. I loved watching children discover they could read that all these worlds were suddenly open to them. It was like giving them keys to kingdoms. You could teach her, Emma, he said. Really teach her, I mean. Not just the basics she'll get at the town school. Grace stopped walking, looking up at him with surprise. You'd want that. Catherine would have wanted it. She believed in education, especially for girls. Said they needed it even more than boys because the world would try to tell them they were less capable. Your wife was a remarkable woman. She was, but so are you, in different ways. The compliment hung between them, unexpected and sincere. Grace's cheeks pinked and she looked away. We should get back to Sam's office. The journey home was different from the ride out. They talked more freely, discussing strategies for the ranch ideas for increasing revenue. Grace suggested planting an orchard on the rocky section by the creek. Apples grew well at this altitude, she said, and there was a growing market in the mining towns. That would take years to show profit, Cole pointed out. Yes, but it's a long-term investment, something for Emma's future. Something for Emma's future implied permanence, a belief that they would all still be together years from now. Cole found he didn't hate the idea as much as he would have even a week ago. As they neared the ranch, they saw smoke rising from the direction of the house. Too much smoke. Cole's heart stopped. He whipped the horses into a run, terror clenching his chest. Fire was every rancher's nightmare, capable of destroying everything in minutes. But as they crested the final hill that they saw, it wasn't the house burning. A pile of broken furniture smoldered in the yard, deliberately set. Emma and Bridget stood nearby, covered in soot but clearly unharmed. Papa, Mama, Grace. Emma ran to the wagon as they pulled up, using both names without hesitation for the first time. Cole jumped down, pulling his daughter into his arms. Are you hurt? Is anyone hurt? No, but Mr. Garrison's men came. Emma's words tumbled out. They said they were taking inventory for when the ranch becomes his. Tom and the hands ran them off, but they tried to get into the house. Tom approached, his face grim. They tried to force their way in, boss. Show on them. Mrs. Murphy and Miss Emma stopped them with a skillet and a fire poker. Come on, Emma's eyes were bright with the thrill of it. Bridget hit one when he grabbed me, and I had my poker ready. We were so brave. Grace had climbed down, and Emma reached for her too, creating a three-way embrace. Cole felt Grace's arms come around them, both joining the circle without hesitation. They stood like that for a moment, like the family they weren't quite yet, but were becoming. Mr. Garrison said you'd be sorry for crossing him, Bridget added. Cole pulled the letter from his coat. Tom, I need you to ride to town tomorrow. This gets delivered directly to Garrison's hand. Make sure there are witnesses. Tom grinned, understanding. With pleasure, boss. That evening, dinner felt different. Emma sat between Cole and Grace instead of just next to her father, chattering about defending the house. The adults listened, exchanging amused glances over her head as she embellished the story. After Emma went to bed, asking Grace to tuck her in alongside Cole, another first, the adults found themselves on the porch in their customary chairs. But the space between them felt smaller now, charged with possibility. Thank you, Cole said quietly. For what? For today, for handling Garrison, for helping Emma, for not giving up, even though I've been, he stopped. Difficult, stubborn, occasionally insufferable. That almost laugh again. I was going to say unwelcoming. That too. I know this isn't what you wanted, Grace. This life, this marriage. But I want you to know I will try to make it bearable. I can't offer you love or affection, but I can offer you respect. Partnership. It was more than she'd expected, though less than that treacherous part of her heart wanted. Partnership, she agreed. That's enough. But even as she said it, she knew it was a lie. The next 5 days passed in a blur of activity. Cole announced he needed to ride south to gather testimonies from other families Garrison had victimized. Grace immediately volunteered to take the northern settlements. You can't travel alone, Cole protested. It's too dangerous. Then send one of the hands with me. They argued, finally compromising. Grace would take Ben, the youngest and most trustworthy ranch hand, north in the wagon. Cole would go south alone on horseback, covering more ground. They'd meet back in 5 days with whatever testimonies they could gather. The morning of their departure, they stood by the wagon, Ben already in the driver's seat, trying not to obviously eavesdrop. "Be careful," Cole said. "You too." Grace hesitated, then rose on her toes to kiss his cheek. "Come back safe." He caught her waist as she pulled away, holding her in place for a moment. "Grace, when this is over, we'll talk," she promised, "about everything." The next 4 days were some of the longest of Grace's life. She and Ben traveled from homestead to homestead, collecting stories of Garrison's cruelty. Each family had a tale of manipulation, of changed terms, of foreclosures and forced sales. Grace documented everything meticulously, had each person sign their statement, gathered whatever papers they'd kept. On the third day, they stopped at a small homestead where a young widow named Mary Patterson lived with her 3 children. Her story was the worst yet. "Garrison came calling 2 weeks after my husband died," Mary said, her voice hollow. "Said I couldn't possibly manage the farm alone. Offered to buy it for barely enough to get us back east. When I refused, he had the sheriff evict us for non-payment of taxes. Taxes my husband had already paid, but Garrison had destroyed the receipts. Would you testify to this in court?" Grace asked gently. Mary looked at her children playing in the dust outside. "What if Garrison comes after us again?" "He won't be able to. Not if we stop him now." Mary signed the statement with shaking hands. On the fourth night, camping under the stars, Ben finally worked up the courage to speak personally. "Mrs. Brennan, can I ask you something?" "Of course, Ben." "Do you love him, Mr. Brennan, I mean?" Grace was quiet for a long moment, contemplating the fire. "I think I'm beginning to," she admitted. "Is it that obvious? The way you look at him when you think no one's watching? The way he looks at you." Ben poked at the fire with a stick. "It's nice seeing him coming back to life. We all worried after Mrs. Catherine died, thought we might lose him too, just in a different way. He loved her very much." "He did, but that doesn't mean he can't love again." Mrs. Catherine would have wanted him to be happy. She was like that, always thinking of others first. When Grace returned to the ranch on the 5th day, she had 15 signed testimonies and a stack of supporting documents. But her triumph was short-lived. The house was too quiet. Emma sat on the porch with red-rimmed eyes. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" Grace's blood ran cold. "Papa's not back yet. He was supposed to be back yesterday." Tom came running. "We were about to send out a search party, ma'am. His horse came back this morning." He stopped, his face grim. "Without him?" Grace's voice was steady despite her terror. Tom nodded. "Saddle's still on. There's blood." Grace's medical training kicked in immediately. "Saddle my horse and 3 others. We're leaving now." "Ma'am, it could be dangerous." "My husband is out there somewhere, possibly hurt. We're going." They found him 5 miles from the southern boundary in a creek bed, unconscious. The bullet wound in his shoulder was at least a day old, already showing signs of infection. His gun was missing. His boots gone, but he was alive. Grace dropped to her knees beside him, her hands already checking his pulse, weak but steady. "We need to get him home." Whist. They improvised a travois, Grace riding beside it to keep Cole stable. He drifted in and out of consciousness, mumbling incoherently. Once he called for Catherine. Once he called for Grace. She held his hand through both. Back at the ranch, Grace took charge. She'd helped her father with gunshot wounds before knew what needed to be done. The bullet had to come out, the wound cleaned and stitched. "Should we get the doctor from town?" Bridget asked anxiously. "No time. The infection's spreading." Grace rolled up her sleeves. "I need boiling water, clean cloths, whiskey, and my sewing kit. And laudanum if we have any." They had a small amount of laudanum, enough to dull the pain, but not enough to knock Cole out completely. Emma refused to leave her father's side, watching with wide, scared eyes as Grace prepared. "I need to get the bullet out," Grace said to Emma gently. "It's going to hurt him. Can you be brave?" Emma now nodded, taking Cole's hand. Grace probed for the bullet, and Cole groaned, his hand crushing hers. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry, but I have to get it out." Cole's eyes focused briefly. "Don't let me die. Emma needs—" "You're not dying," Grace said firmly. "Not on my watch." It took an hour to remove the bullet and clean the wound properly. By the end, Grace was shaking with exhaustion and stress, but the bleeding had stopped and Cole was sleeping more peacefully. She sat beside his bed all night, monitoring his fever, forcing water and medicine down his throat when he'd take it. Emma curled up beside her, refusing to leave. "Is he going to be okay?" the child whispered. "Yes. Your papa's strong. He'll pull through. You saved him. Just like you said you knew medicine." "I helped. He's saving himself by fighting." Emma was quiet for a moment, then said, "I'm glad you're here. I didn't want to be at first, but now I'm glad." Grace pulled the girl closer, kissing the top of her head. "I'm glad too, sweetheart." Cole's fever broke near dawn. His eyes opened clear and focused, finding Grace immediately. "You look terrible," he rasped. "You look worse," she retorted, but her relief was evident. "What happened?" "Someone shot you. Garrison's men ambushed you on the road back. They took the testimonies you'd collected." Grace's heart sank, but she kept her voice steady. "It doesn't matter. You're alive. That's what matters." "Does it? Without those testimonies? We have others. I collected 15 statements, all documented. Sam can work with those." Cole tried to sit up, winced, fell back. "You went alone?" "With Ben. And before you start lecturing me about safety, perhaps we should discuss you riding alone through hostile territory." "That's different. How because you're—" She stopped, realizing what he was about to say. "I'm what, your wife, your partner, or just a woman who shouldn't take the same risks you do?" Cole caught her hand. "All of those things, and someone I care about. Someone I don't want to lose." The admission hung between them, more intimate than any physical touch. 2 days later, Cole was still weak but recovering. Grace was changing his bandages when Tom burst in. "Boss, we got a problem. Man from Boston just rode in. Says his name is Philip Ashford. Claims he's Mrs. Brennan's cousin." Grace went white, her hand freezing on the bandage. "Grace?" Cole's voice was sharp with concern. She couldn't speak, the memories flooding back: Philip's proposition, his threats, the harassment that had driven her west. "Tell him we'll be out in a moment," Cole said to Tom. After Tom left, Cole took Grace's hand. "Who is he?" Grace found her voice, told him quickly about Philip, the married cousin who'd wanted her as his mistress, the threats to expose her father's work as indecent, the way he'd made Boston unbearable. Cole's face darkened with fury. He tried to get up. "You're not healed enough," Grace pushed him back. "I won't let him. I'll handle it, but I need you to trust me." Their eyes met. Cole settled back. "I trust you." Grace walked to the porch, her spine straight, her chin high. Cole watched from the window, hand on his gun, despite his weakness, ready to intervene if needed. Philip sat on his hired horse, dressed in expensive Eastern clothes, looking exactly like what he was, a city predator, out of his element. "Grace, my dear," he said, tipping his hat with false courtesy. "How rustic you've become." "Philip, why are you here? Is that any way to greet family? I've come all this way to check on your welfare. When I heard you'd married so suddenly, so soon after arriving, I was concerned. Such haste suggests desperation, doesn't it?" Cole appeared in the doorway, despite Grace's warning look, leaning against the doorframe to hide his weakness. "You must be the cousin," Cole said coldly, "the married one who propositioned her." Philip's face flushed. "I don't believe we've been introduced." "Cole Brennan, Grace's husband, the real kind with vows before God and everything. Not the back alley arrangement that you had in mind." Emma appeared behind Cole, slipping her hand into Grace's. "United front. Family." Philip pulled out a leather folder. "I'm here on business, actually. It seems Grace's father owed my family considerable money. Debts that must be settled before she can access any inheritance." Grace's stomach dropped. "That's a lie. Father's debts were all paid." "Do you have proof?" Philip smiled. "Because I have documents here showing—" Hoofbeats interrupted him. Vincent Garrison rode up, his timing too perfect to be coincidence. "Ah, Mr. Ashford," Garrison said smoothly. "I see you found her." Grace's eyes narrowed. "You two know each other." Garrison's smile widened. "Mr. Ashford contacted me months ago. Mentioned his cousin had relocated to Copper Ridge. I recognized the name from your teaching application. When I needed someone to encourage, Mr. Brennan here to marry you seemed the perfect solution." The conspiracy revealed itself. Philip wanted Grace's inheritance. Garrison wanted the ranch. Together, they'd orchestrated this forced marriage to access both. And now that you've accessed your inheritance by marrying, Philip said. We'll just need you to sign it over to settle your father's debts. There are no debts, Grace said firmly. That's for courts to decide. And I know the judge quite well, Garrison added. Grace stepped forward. No. I beg your pardon. Philip's confidence wavered. I said no to all of it, all. Your fake debts, your schemes, your threats. This is my home, my family, my life, and you have no power here. A new voice cut through the tension. The judge won't be hearing anything. Daniel Hayes rode up looking grim. I've filed complaints with the territorial governor about your practices, Garrison, including this conspiracy with Mr. Ashford here. He produced documents. Turns out Mr. Ashford's debts are entirely fabricated. Also interesting, he's wanted in Massachusetts for fraud. Philip paled. How? Garrison's face went from red to purple. This isn't over, Garrison started. Sheriff Bradley appeared with deputies. Actually, it is. Vincent Garrison, Philip Ashford, you're both under arrest. As they were led away in chains, still protesting, Grace's knees gave out. Cole caught her despite his injuries, guiding her to the porch swing. Emma climbed into her lap and they sat together shaking with relief. That evening after Emma was asleep, Cole found Grace in the barn, sitting in the hayloft in darkness, just sitting, processing everything. He climbed up painfully, sat beside her. Neither spoke for a long moment, just presence. Why didn't you tell me, he asked finally, about your father, all the details? Because you never asked, and I'm used to people not wanting to know my truth. I'm asking now. Grace told him everything, her father's compassion for fallen women, the scandal Boston's cruelty, her continuation of his work in Montana. Cole listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said simply, your father sounds like he was a good man. Grace's eyes filled with tears. He was, the best I knew. Thank you for telling me. They sat in silence for 10 more minutes. No words needed, just two broken people learning to be whole together. Finally, Grace said, thank you. For what? For not asking me to explain, for not judging, for just being here. I'm learning that sometimes being here is enough. He reached out, took her hand in the darkness. They sat like that until the moon set. This moment, not a kiss, not a dramatic declaration, was when they truly fell in love. Walking back to the house hand in hand, Emma watching from the window with a smile, they both knew tomorrow would bring new challenges. But tonight they were together, and that was enough. 3 weeks passed after Garrison and Philip's arrest. The ranch settled into a peaceful rhythm that felt almost too perfect, like the calm before a storm. Cole's shoulder healed under Grace's careful ministrations, and each day he grew stronger. But both of them knew Garrison wouldn't stay in jail forever. The letter from Daniel Hayes arrived on a crisp September morning, confirming their fears. Garrison posted bail. Cole read aloud to Grace and Tom in the kitchen. His lawyer found a technicality. Trial set for 60 days out, but he's free until then. Tom's face darkened. We should post guards watch the roads. He won't attack directly, Cole said. Too obvious now that Daniel and the governor are watching. Then what will he do? Grace asked, though part of her already knew. Men like Garrison didn't fight fair. They went for the throat for the things you couldn't defend. They didn't have to wait long to find out. 3 days later, Emma came home from town with Bridget, her face streaked with tears. Grace met them at the door, immediately kneeling to the child's level. Sweetheart, what happened? Emma threw herself into Grace's arms, sobbing. The kids at school, they said Papa isn't really my papa, that Mama was that you're a... She couldn't finish, crying too hard. Grace's blood ran cold. She looked at Bridget, who nodded grimly. Garrison's been spreading rumors, the older woman said, saying Catherine was unfaithful, that Emma's a bastard child, and that Grace is... Well, he's using her father's work against her, calling her a whore who consorts with prostitutes. Cole appeared in the doorway, having heard everything. His face went white with rage, then red. I'll kill him. No, Grace said firmly, still holding Emma. That's what he wants, for you to do something stupid that gets you arrested. Then he takes the ranch while you're in jail. She pulled back to look at Emma's tear-stained face. Listen to me, sweetheart. What those children said, it's not true. Your papa is your papa. Your Mama Catherine was a good woman. And what people are saying about me, she paused, choosing her words carefully. Sometimes people fear what they don't understand. My father helped women that others had given up on. That's not shameful, that's mercy. But they said that I shouldn't be around you. Do you think I'm bad? Emma shook her head violently. You save Papa. You teach me medicine. You're brave. Then that's all that matters. Grace hugged her close. People who don't know us will say things, but we know the truth. After Emma went to bed early, exhausted from crying, Cole paced the kitchen like a caged animal. I can't let him do this. Attack! You attack! Emma spread lies about Catherine. So we fight back, Grace said calmly, but not with fists, with truth. How? Grace stood, her mind already working. We call a town meeting at the church tomorrow night, and I tell them everything about my father, about Garrison's conspiracy with Philip, about what he's really doing. Grace, that's people might turn against you. They already have, according to Garrison. What do I have to lose? She met his eyes. But I might have something to gain. If even a few people believe me, if even a few families stand with us, it's risky. Living is risky. I'm tired of hiding. Tom, who'd been listening quietly, spoke up. I'll spread word about the meeting. Make sure folks know it's important. The next evening, the church was packed. Not just ranch families, but townspeople too. Some curious, some hostile, some simply there for the spectacle. Grace saw Mrs. Patterson whispering to Mrs. Henderson, saw the school teacher who'd replaced her sitting with arms crossed, saw Garrison in the back with his lawyer smiling that oily smile. Sheriff Bradley stood near the front, hand resting casually on his gun belt. His presence was reassuring. Daniel had said the sheriff was one of the good ones, just waiting for the right moment to act. Cole, Emma, and Bridget sat in the front pew. Emma clutched Grace's hand as they walked to the front of the church together. Grace faced the congregation, her heart pounding, but her voice steady. Thank you all for coming. I know there have been rumors about me, about my family, about my husband. I'm here tonight to tell you the truth. She took a breath. My father was Dr. James Ashford, one of Boston's finest physicians. He treated everyone, rich, poor, respectable, fallen, because he believed every human being deserves medical care regardless of their station or their sins. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I assisted him from the time I was 12 years old. Yes, I treated prostitutes, women with diseases, women society had thrown away. I bandaged their wounds, delivered their babies, sat with them when they died. Her voice grew stronger. Is that immoral or is it Christian charity? She turned to address the crowd directly. Some of you in this room came to my father secretly, for conditions you couldn't tell other doctors about. I never told anyone. That's called doctor-patient confidentiality. A few people shifted uncomfortably, recognizing themselves in her words. But Mr. Garrison wants to call that immoral. Grace pointed toward the back where Garrison sat. You know what's really immoral? Forcing a widow to marry to keep his land. Charging illegal interest rates to families who have nothing. Conspiring with criminals to steal people's inheritances. She pulled out the forged debt documents Philip had tried to use. These are fake. Philip Ashford, my cousin, created false debts to steal my inheritance. And Mr. Garrison helped him because they were working together. Garrison gets the ranch. Philip gets my money. Daniel Hayes stood. I can confirm everything Mrs. Brennan is saying. I have documentation of the conspiracy which has been submitted to the territorial governor. Mary Patterson rose from her seat, her voice shaking but determined. Mrs. Brennan came to my home when I had nothing. She documented what Garrison did to my family, how he destroyed my husband's tax receipts and stole our land. She gave me dignity when everyone else had given up on me. One by one, other families stood. Henderson, Miller, Johnson, O'Brien, Mackenzie. 15 families in all, each sharing how Grace had helped them, how Garrison had victimized them. She helped my wife through a difficult birth, Henderson said. No judgment, just kindness. She treated my daughter's fever, saved her life, another called out. The tide was turning. Grace could feel it in the room, the shift from hostility to understanding, from suspicion to support. Garrison stood, his face purple with rage. This is nonsense. She's a... Careful what you say next, Sheriff Bradley warned. There are ladies and children present. Garrison's eyes darted around, seeing his control slipping. Fine. Spread your lies. But the law is the law. Brennan still owes me money, and when he defaults, he won't default. Grace pulled out another document. This is a bank draft for $4,000 from my father's former business partner. An investment in the ranch. More than enough to pay your fraudulent loan in full. Cole's head whipped around to look at her. She hadn't told him about this, had written to Boston weeks ago, had received the response yesterday, had kept it secret until this moment. You've had money this whole time, Cole asked quietly, tied up in investments. I couldn't access it without either marrying or turning 30. She looked at him directly. Marrying you solved that problem, but more importantly, her voice softened. Somewhere along the way, I stopped wanting to leave, started wanting to stay, to fight for this place, for this life, for you. The church was silent, everyone watching this intimate moment play out. Cole stood, walked to her, took her hands in his. Grace, I pity you. Mr. Brennan, Emma's scream cut through the air. Watch out. Garrison had pulled a gun, pointing it directly at Grace. If I can't have the land, no one will, starting with her. Everything happened at once. Cole lunged forward, putting himself between Grace and the gun. Emma jumped in front of Cole, and Sheriff Bradley's gun cleared its holster with practiced speed. That's enough, Garrison, Bradley said calmly. Drop the weapon. You can't. I can, and I am. Bradley gestured to his deputies. Vincent Garrison, you're under arrest for attempted murder. In addition to fraud, extortion, conspiracy, and about 15 other charges Mr. Hayes here has documented. As the deputies moved in, Garrison's lawyer backed away, hands raised. I had no knowledge of any of this. Save it for the judge, Bradley said. He looked at Grace. You all right, ma'am? Grace was shaking, but her voice was steady. Yes, thank you, Sheriff. As Garrison was led away in chains, this time for good, the congregation erupted. Some rushed forward to embrace Grace and Cole. Others stood in stunned silence. But the threat was over. Emma wrapped her arms around Grace's waist. You were so brave, Mama Grace. We all were, sweetheart. Outside, as the crowd dispersed, Cole pulled Grace aside. $4,000. You've had that money and never said anything. I wanted to be sure that this was real, that you wanted me here for me, not for money. Grace, he cupped her face in his hands. I don't want your money. I want you. I know, that's why I stayed. That night, after Emma was finally asleep, kept talking about how they'd all been heroes, Cole found Grace on the porch. She stood at the railing looking out at the moonlit valley. Come with me, he said quietly. There's something I need to do. He led her to the barn, saddled 2 horses. Grace didn't ask where they were running, just trusted him. They rode in companionable silence, climbing the hill behind the ranch. The cemetery sat peaceful under the stars. Catherine's grave was well-tended, wildflowers growing around the simple stone marker. Cole dismounted, helped Grace down. Emma had asked to come, but he'd said this was something he needed to do alone. Well, not alone. With Grace. They stood before the headstone together. Catherine, Cole said softly, this is Grace. I think you'd like her. She's nothing like you, where you were gentle. She's fierce. Where you were soft, she's steel. But she loves Emma, and she's saved this ranch. And she makes me want to live again, not just survive. Grace felt tears sliding down her cheeks. Cole continued, I'll always love you. You were my first at everything. First love, first loss, first lesson that hearts can hold more than one truth at a time. He paused. But I'm falling in love with Grace too. And I need you to know it doesn't diminish what we had. It's just different. He turned to Grace, still standing before Catherine's grave, and took both her hands in his. I love you, Grace Ashford Brennan. Not instead of Catherine, but alongside her memory. Not as a replacement, but as yourself. Can that be enough? Grace was crying openly now. It's everything. He kissed her there before Catherine's grave, with the past as witness and the future opening before them. A red-tailed hawk cried overhead, circling once before disappearing into the night sky. Catherine loved hawks, Cole said softly, said they were freedom itself. Then she's free now, Grace whispered. And so are we. They rode back to the ranch, hand in hand, and for the first time since Catherine's death, Cole felt the weight lift from his chest. Not the grief that would always be there, a scar on his heart, but the guilt, the feeling that loving again was betrayal. Catherine's final diary entry had been right. Grace was strong, patient, exactly what they needed. That night, Grace stood in the hallway between her room and Cole's as she had so many nights before. But this time when his door opened, she didn't hesitate. "I don't want to be alone tonight," she said. "Neither do I." She crossed the threshold into his room, their room now. No more separate beds. No more walls between them. They came together with tenderness and passion healing and joy intertwined. This wasn't the desperate coupling of two strangers forced together. This was the joining of two people who'd chosen each other, who'd fought for each other, who'd learned to love despite, or perhaps because of all the obstacles in their path. Afterward, lying in his arms, Grace traced the scar on his shoulder from the bullet wound she'd removed. "I was so scared," she admitted. "When I saw you lying there, I thought, I know, I thought the same when Garrison pointed that gun at you." He pulled her closer. "I can't lose you, Grace. I won't survive losing someone I love again. You won't lose me. I'm not going anywhere." They talked through the night, sharing stories they'd held back before. Grace told him about her mother who died when she was young, about her loneliness growing up, always the odd one out, about her dreams of having a family, a place to belong. Cole shared memories of Catherine, but also of his childhood, his parents, his decision to come west. They talked about Emma, about their hopes for her future. "She wants to be a doctor," Grace said with a smile, "like my father." "She could be. You could teach her. We could teach her. Together." As dawn broke, painting the room in shades of gold, they finally slept wrapped in each other's arms. The weeks that followed were the happiest Grace had ever known. Garrison remained in jail, his trial set for November. The ranch thrived with the investment money they hired. Two more hands, bought new cattle, started planting the orchard Grace had suggested. Emma flourished, dividing her time between regular schooling and medical lessons with Grace. She'd announced to the whole town that she was going to be a doctor, just like Grandpa Ashford, and no one dared contradict her. Bridget had softened completely toward Grace, the two women working together in easy harmony. One evening, Bridget confessed her old feelings for Cole. "I was so jealous of you at first," she admitted over tea. "Not just because of Catherine's memory, because I'd loved him for years, silently, foolishly." Grace took her hand. "That's not foolish. Love is never foolish, even when it's unrequited. You're kind to say so, but I've let it go now, and I'm glad it's you with him, and you make him happy." "You'll find your own happiness," Grace predicted. And she was right. 2 weeks later, Sheriff Bradley's widowed brother James came to town. He and Bridget struck up an immediate friendship that quickly bloomed into courtship. November came with the first snow and Garrison's trial. Cole and Grace traveled to the territorial capital to testify. The trial lasted 3 days. Garrison's lawyer tried every trick, but the evidence was overwhelming. 17 families testifying to fraud documents, proving conspiracy with Philip Ashford, who'd already been convicted in Massachusetts, and Sheriff Bradley's meticulous records of crimes spanning years. The jury deliberated for less than an hour. Guilty on all counts, 15 years in prison. Walking out of the courthouse, Cole pulled Grace into his arms right there on the steps in front of everyone. "It's over, really over. We're free," she said, laughing and crying at once. That night in their hotel room, Grace realized she was late, very late. She'd been so caught up in the trial preparations that she hadn't noticed. But now, counting back, "Cole," she said quietly, "I need to tell you something." He looked up from the papers he was reviewing, saw her expression, and went very still. "What is it?" I'm fairly certain I'm pregnant." The color drained from his face. He set down the papers carefully as if they might shatter. "Pregnant? Yes, due in late spring, I think." He couldn't speak. Grace watched the emotions play across his face, joy, terror, hope, fear, all at once. "Cole, talk to me." "Catherine died in childbirth," he said hoarsely. "She bled, and nothing I did could stop it." "I can't, Grace. I can't lose you too." She went to him, took his face in her hands. "You won't. I'm not Catherine. I know more about childbirth than most women. I've assisted at dozens of deliveries. I know the danger signs, what to watch for. And we'll get the best midwife in the territory. You can't promise." "No, but I can promise to fight, and I have you beside me. Catherine was alone so much while you worked the ranch. I won't be alone. We're stronger together, remember." He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. I'm scared. So am I, but we'll face it together. They didn't tell Emma immediately, wanting to be sure the pregnancy would continue. But children have ways of knowing things, and by December, Emma was asking pointed questions about why Grace was tired all the time and couldn't stand the smell of bacon. Are you sick? Emma asked one morning, finding Grace bent over the wash basin. Not exactly sick, Grace managed. Emma's eyes went wide. Are you going to have a baby? Grace and Cole, who just entered the kitchen, exchanged glances. Yes, sweetheart, Cole said. There's going to be a baby in the spring. Emma was quiet for a long moment, and Grace's heart sank. Of course the child would feel threatened. She'd already lost one mother, now she might feel like she was losing her place in this new family. Will you still love me? Emma asked in a small voice. When you have your own baby. Grace knelt, pulling Emma close despite the nausea. Oh, sweetheart. You are my own. You're my daughter in every way that matters. This baby will be your little brother or sister, but you'll always be my first child. The one who taught me how to be a mother. Really? Really? And you know what? This baby is going to need a big sister. Someone to teach them everything: how to gather eggs without getting pecked, how to ride a horse, how to be brave. Do you think you could do that? Emma straightened, responsibility settling on her small shoulders. I could do that. I'd be a good big sister. The best, Cole agreed, pulling them both into his embrace. As winter settled over the ranch, Grace's pregnancy progressed normally. Cole hovered constantly, insisting she rest more, eat more, avoid any strain. It was both touching and occasionally infuriating. I'm pregnant, not made of glass, she told him one January morning when he tried to prevent her from carrying a bucket of water. Humor me, he said, taking the bucket. I need to feel like I'm doing something to keep you safe. She softened, understanding his fear. I'm being careful. I promise. The pregnancy brought them even closer. Cole would read to her in the evenings, his hand resting on her growing belly, talking to the baby about the ranch, about Emma, about the family they were building. In February, a letter arrived with unexpected news. Philip Ashford was dead, shot by a husband who'd found him with his wife. Grace felt nothing, or perhaps too many things to sort out. Relief, certainly, a touch of sadness for the waste of a life, but mostly she felt free. The last tie to her old life, the last threat to her new happiness, was gone. There was more news in the letter. Philip had never changed his will after his wife left him. Grace was named as a beneficiary, a substantial sum. I don't want it, Grace said immediately. Don't decide yet, Cole urged. Think about what you could do with it. After discussing it with Cole and Daniel, Grace made her decision. She accepted the inheritance, but put it entirely toward the community building, a proper schoolhouse, and establishing a lending library, creating a fund for families hit by hardship. Turn his selfishness into something good, she told Cole. That's the best revenge. March brought unexpected snowstorms and news from Daniel that made Grace's blood run cold. The traveling doctor who'd examined her confirmed what she'd suspected, but hoped wasn't true. You're carrying twins, Mrs. Brennan. Cole went white. Grace felt the room tilt. Twins increase the risk, the doctor said bluntly. You should consider going to Denver for the delivery where there are hospitals. No, Grace said firmly, even as fear clawed at her chest. This ranch is my home. My children will be born here. After the doctor left, Cole was nearly beside himself. Grace, please, if something goes wrong, then we'll handle it together. She took his hands. I know my body. I know the signs to watch for. And I've already arranged for the best midwife in 3 counties to come stay at the ranch for the last month. But twins are a blessing. Unexpected, yes. Challenging, certainly, but a blessing. April arrived with meadowlarks and wildflowers, and Grace was enormous, moving difficult, sleeping nearly impossible. But she remained stubbornly cheerful, much to everyone's amazement. How are you not miserable? Bridget asked, watching Grace lower herself carefully